King Arthur's magical sword Excalibur, said to render its wielder invincible in battle. Contrary to modern versions of the story, in the original Arthurian tales, Excalibur is not the same sword that Arthur draws from the stone to prove himself king. Once Arthur has assumed kingship, Merlin takes him to receive Excalibur from a mysterious water nymph called the Lady of the Lake. Ultimately, after witnessing too much bloodshed, Arthur grows weary of battle, neglects affairs of state, and for many years lives as a recluse. Excalibur is entrusted to Queen Guinevere, who, after an adulterous affair with Sir Lancelot, herself retires from court. She becomes a nun and orders Excalibur to be hidden. Intriguingly, here at the National Library of Wales in the town of Aberystwyth, there survive ancient literary references to reveal where it was thought Guinevere spent time as a nun. A 13th century manuscript catalogued as Penneth 16 contains a series of much earlier Welsh poems that concern Guinevere. They place her in what is now the county of Shropshire, which is exactly where my research suggests the historical King Arthur originated. Arthur, I believe, ruled from the city of Viraconium, and 20 miles to the northwest of here is the town of Oswestry. Just outside the town there rises a flat-topped hill, where 1500 years ago, the period in which Arthur and Guinevere are said to have lived, there stood a fortified settlement. And it is here, we are told, that Guinevere was born. The settlement has long since vanished from history, and all that survives are its defensive earthen embankments and ditches, where local people walk their dogs along what were once emplacements for high wooden stockades, and tourists can look out over countryside that has little changed since the time that Guinevere is said to have lived. But this is not the only place associated with Guinevere in the county of Shropshire. To the west of Viraconium stand the ruins of White Lady's Priory. The remains of the ecclesiastical building that survive today date from the 1100s, but a much earlier priory did stand on the spot and could have dated back 1500 years. And it is here that Guinevere is said to have spent her time as a nun. There is a common misconception that the name White Lady's Priory originated with the white habits worn by the nuns. But the nuns that resided here were of the Augustinian order that had no particular dress code at all during the Middle Ages. In fact, the earliest references to the building refer to it as the White Lady's Priory, as in belonging to a white lady, and remarkably, the name Guinevere comes from the Old British meaning literally white lady. So it is just possible that an historical Guinevere did spend time here, and if so, this, according to the legend, would be where she kept Excalibur. Eventually, according to the legend, Arthur recovers his wits and is reunited with Guinevere, and she returns to him his sword. However, Excalibur seems to have lost its magic, because soon afterwards, Arthur receives a mortal wound at the Battle of Camlan. In the famous Arthurian romance, upon the king's death, Arthur's knight Sir Bedivere returns Excalibur to the Lady of the Lake. When he casts the weapon into the water, the arm of the Lady of the Lake rises from the surface, catches the sword, and takes it down into the crystal depths. But what about the sword of an historical Arthur, a real-life figure behind the legend? As unlikely as it might sound, this story of Excalibur could be based on a real event. Archaeologists excavating the dried-up beds of ancient lakes have unearthed artifacts that had been deliberately cast into the waters centuries ago by the Celtic people of Britain, and these included many swords. These items were thrown into sacred pools and lakes as offerings to deities. So the legend of Excalibur being thrown to the Lady of the Lake may have originated with a funeral rite where Arthur's sword is cast into a lake as an offering to a water goddess. So does a real Excalibur still lie somewhere waiting to be found? Just a few miles north of Viraconium is the village of Baschurch, where I believe the historical King Arthur was laid to rest, specifically in a chapel that once stood on what is now this modern road. The place was originally called Bedwere's Grove, which means quite literally the Grove of Bedivere. And right beside it, there is a lake. Could this have been where an historical figure behind the story of Sir Bedivere have thrown a real King Arthur's sword, which in legend became the miraculous Excalibur? And is it just possible that it still survives preserved in the mud at the bottom of these waters, awaiting discovery even today?